It's interesting to me to think that the general cultural perception of the Western in film has been shaped more by deconstructions of the genre, rather than the original golden age of Hollywood Westerns itself. The popularity of the Dollars trilogy, or more recently Django Unchained and The Hateful Eight, have familiarized general audiences with the concept of spaghetti westerns, but most people don't realize that nearly the entirety of our modern view of the Wild West was shaped by overseas parodies or riffs on the American West. Elements of Western storytelling that seem standard to us now, from the thematic, like morally gray gunslingers at the end of their rope, industry and civilization encroaching on the freedom and lawlessness of the West, to the visual, sweeping landscapes cutting to extreme close-ups of squinting eyes, hands creeping towards holsters, shots framed between legs. The spaghetti western has essentially overtaken the American Western in terms of genre influence. Long gone are the days of white-hatted movie stars rescuing white women from savage Indians,
Why are you white?
or the all-American sheriff liberating a town from dastardly Mexican banditos. The Western of today is defined by the loss of morality, the nature of civilization, and the looming cloud of industrialized society. Not black hat versus white hat, not cowboy versus Indian, but man versus man versus self, and man vs. nature. Rockstar Games' Red Dead Redemption series unquestionably follows this trend of reanalyzing the mythos of the American West. While Red Dead 1 was far more satirical and heightened in its riff on the Wild West, Red Dead 2 takes a more reflective and nuanced approach to grounding this setting and humanizing its characters. This game isn't interested in making fun of the ridiculousness of the genre, but in appreciating and analyzing everything the genre has to offer, perfectly blending fact and fiction to capture the entire spirit of the Wild West and question what it stood for, and what it still stands for in pop culture today. The opening text of RDR2 proclaims that by 1899, the age of outlaws and gunslingers was at an end. By all intents and purposes, this is true. Criminality will always exist, but it had been decades since the American West was truly wild. Once open country paradise now saw boom towns, railroads, and telegraph wires. The fist of the US government loomed from ocean to ocean. The antics of gangs, gunslingers, and outlaws, once deified in folklore, were no longer tolerated. The game's opening text is followed by our introduction to an on-the-run Vanderlyn gang. Namesake Dutch Vanderlyn, a charismatic and idealistic leader, growing more desperate and paranoid every day as the inevitable end grows close. Dutch and the eventual collapse of his gang take inspiration from all kinds of historical influences, but in a narrative sense, I'm immediately reminded of 2007's The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, starring Brad Pitt in what I think is his career best work as the famed American outlaw. Many similarities can be made between Dutch Vanderlyn and Pitt's interpretation of the real historical figure. They're both leaders of gangs, robbing trains, banks, stagecoaches, taking hostages, killing lawmen, and becoming infamous for these exploits through the newspaper and their mythos. Both are charming, charismatic leaders who gather a loyal group of followers. They both have a rebellious nature, a twisted sense of duty, and devote themselves to a lost ideal of what America once was and what it should be, with Jesse James fighting for the Southern cause even after the Civil War, and Vanderlyn fighting for the freedom of the Wild West. We see from both these characters, however, that these grand philosophies may just be shallow justifications for greed and influence. Expertly directed by Andrew Dominic and masterfully shot by Roger Deakins, The Assassination of Jesse James is a beautiful slow burn of a film, with striking visuals and transformative acting and production design. It follows the perspective and life story of one of the gang members, Robert Ford, as he grows bitter and disillusioned with a leader he was once utterly captivated by. Unlike Arthur Morgan, however, the coward Robert Ford grows jealous of Jesse's fame and, well, kills him. So the film uses the icon status of Jesse James to represent the myth of the American West as a whole, to represent the power of man vs. myth itself, and its power once it's gone. Like the martyrdom of Jesse James, the legend of the West was deified in its death, and the Western genre was born. The film's incredibly thought-provoking, and it's clear Rockstar used much of it thematically and visually when developing Red Dead. Hell, the train robbery sequence is lifted directly from the film. Also, I'm aware Red Dead's lore does have its own Jesse James allegory, that being Otis Miller. I'm not insinuating that Dutch is this universe's Jesse James, but that the storytelling and character between these two works share lots of the same DNA. The gang of the James brothers weren't the only iconic figures of the American West, and definitely not the only group that would influence the story of the Vanderlyn gang. Who could forget the gang of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, most famously portrayed in the 1969 film adaptation, co-starring Hollywood powerhouses Robert Redford and Paul Newman as the duo. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is far more traditional in its structure than the assassination of Jesse James. Like in RDR2, we follow the duo's gang hot on the run after a botched robbery. This is the first of many similarities to Red Dead. Butch is the idealist and planner, with Sundance serving as his right-hand man and enforcer. And as law and civilization encroach on the once-free American frontier, the gang makes plans to flee overseas, to a tropical paradise in Latin America or the South Pacific, finding themselves in Bolivia by the end of the film.
Where the hell is Tahiti?
South Pacific, an untouched paradise.
Who lives there?
Tahitians, I guess.
Bolivia? What's Bolivia? Bolivia, that's a country, stupid.
The latter half of Butch and Sundance actually reminds me quite a bit of John's story in Red Dead 1, especially with the way both works close. Like John in the end, Butch and Sundance find themselves completely outnumbered and cornered by lawmen, and must come to terms with the inevitable. The way John says his goodbyes to his family is much like the way Butch and Sundance share their last goodbyes. That is, they don't. The dialogue is almost coded, as they know death is just around the corner, but they choose to be hopeful, sharing their admiration for another and plans for future adventures. And then, like John, they swing open the door ready to confront their sins and meet their maker. But don't let this ending fool you. Unlike John, they go out triumphantly. This film is far less moody and bleak than the assassination of Jesse James was. It's a more standard Western adventure, but it's a lot of fun for it. And if you love Red Dead, you'll have a great time. Before the release of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in 2019, Quentin Tarantino compared the co-starring of Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio as the Redford and Newman of our era, and that not since Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid had there been such a big name leading duo. It's no secret that Tarantino loves and pulls immense influence from westerns, specifically spaghetti westerns. He and I actually share a favorite movie and director, being The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and Sergio Leone respectively. Tarantino's honestly done a lot this past decade to rejuvenate the spaghetti western into the 21st century, with his crowning achievement in the genre being 2012's Django Unchained, starring Jamie Foxx in the titular role. The film was a box office smash and a mega hit, a rarity for this genre in the past decades. Don't crucify me, but I actually think Django might be looked back on as this generation's Dollars trilogy, in a sense. When it comes to redefining the general popular consensus of what a Western can be, I mean. It's undoubtedly the most influential Western for general audiences of the modern day. In fact, I think Django Unchained, more than any other Western film, shows the most direct influence in RDR2's visual style, setting, and iconography. Django Unchained is a spiritual reimagining to Sergio Corbucci's Italian cult classic Django, trading the Wild West for the antebellum South, and a story of a liberated slave turned charismatic bounty hunter, quote-unquote the fastest gun in the South. And while Red Dead Redemption 2's story does include numerous references to the race relations of the era, it shares more thematic elements with the previous two films, whereas Django's laser-focused on race. However, where the influence is clear as day between the two is when you sink your teeth into the game's open world, a large portion of which is focused on adapting on all sorts of facets of the American South throughout the 19th century. Both Tarantino and Rockstar saw the rich story potential in juxtaposing the lawless, wild freedom of the open country with generations of order, aristocracy, and slavery, pitting Western cowboys against the Southern elite. In Django Unchained, it's a battle of black and white. In Red Dead Redemption 2, it's very much East and West. But that general theme was already what Red Dead was going for overall. So if using elements and imagery of the South and from Django Unchained only enhances that, then more power to them.